Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, and New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker. So, Mike, Kamala Harris is going to be going to Delaware. She's going to be visiting the campaign staff. What do we know about that visit, and what do we know about any interactions she's been having with President Biden in these last 24 hours?
Well, Katie, any minute now, we should see some pictures of Vice President Harris boarding Air Force Two for that very short flight from the Washington area into Wilmington, Delaware. And from there, she'll head to the campaign headquarters, what was the Biden-Harris campaign headquarters, now the Harris to-be-determined campaign headquarters. And this is an important visit because since last April, when the president announced he was seeking a second term, his campaign has raised tens of millions of dollars, built a behemoth of an organization across the country, and hired hundreds of staff to not just staff the battleground states, but especially to staff the campaign headquarters. And they were rather uncertain yesterday, in fact, learning just as we all were publicly when that announcement came from the president that he would not seek a second term. So it was important, we're told, for the vice president, for her to go as soon as she could to speak to those employees directly. The leadership of the campaign has made it clear to them that this was a campaign that was designed and built to win across the country and to beat Donald Trump, and it remains that, and that everyone who is employed on the campaign will continue to be. But it's also an important opportunity for Harris to meet with the campaign leadership, and she wants to put her own stamp on this campaign. Every campaign is a reflection of the candidate it represents, and there is clearly, as much as Biden and Harris were a close-knit team over the last 3+ years, really almost 4 years since she joined the ticket in the summer of 2020, she does now lead the ticket and was going to want to have a campaign that represents her more fully. So there will be conversations as well about potential changes, ways in which her team will be layered into this operation, and what, if anything, is going to change now as she moves forward with the imperative of having to win an election with a 100+ day sprint. Reminder, she is not the Democratic nominee just yet, but as more and more leaders across the party have come out today to make their endorsement of her official, it does appear clear that whatever process unfolds to determine that nomination is one that is going to be much more of a coronation in the end for Kamala Harris.
Also, what the party and the campaign, whichever campaign it ends up being, will do with the nearly $100 million that has been raised in just the past day. All right, Ryan, let's talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill. Leader Jeffries and the Majority Leader Schumer were supposed to be meeting with Kamala Harris. Jeffries said shortly. Have they already met with her? Are they going to be meeting with her after the visit to Delaware?
We don't exactly know the time frame of when that meeting will take place, Katie, just that we know it's going to happen soon. And while both Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have had a lot of good things to say about Kamala Harris, they've stopped short of giving her their outright endorsement. They do at least want the opportunity to meet with her, look her in the eye, have a face-to-face conversation before they take that step. And I think that is reflective of this concern that this be somewhat of an open nominating contest, that there be the opportunity for others to put their hat in the ring if they are so willing to do so. And Schumer and Jeffries don't want to put their thumb on the scale until they absolutely have to. But listen to what Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, had to say about Kamala Harris in this race just a few minutes ago.
Leader Schumer and I are scheduled to meet with Vice President Harris shortly. The House came back into session today. The Senate does not come back into session tomorrow. I'm excited for that meeting. And let me say this, that Vice President Kamala Harris has excited the community. She's excited the House Democratic Caucus, and she's exciting the country. And so I'm looking forward to sitting down with her in person in short order with Leader Schumer, and we'll have more to say about the path forward as soon as that meeting concludes.
And that, of course, classic Hakeem Jeffries, shortly does not give us any kind of specific idea as to when that meeting will take place. But you can read between the lines. He's mentioned that the Senate is not back in session till tomorrow. So there's the realistic possibility that Chuck Schumer is not even in Washington yet. So I would not be surprised if that meeting doesn't take place until tomorrow. There's probably not a lot of suspense here. It seems very likely that Schumer and Jeffries will join the rest of the Democratic power base that is getting behind the Kamala Harris campaign. And I think a big big reason for that, Katie and Chris, is that we've seen the last 3 weeks of turmoil, of angst, of a divided Democratic Party. The Democrats I talk to are just sick of that. They want to move on. They want to unite behind a candidate. They want to take on Donald Trump. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing everyone be so swiftly willing to get behind Kamala Harris's campaign.
And Peter, we were just watching as Kamala Harris at JBA, Joint Base Andrews, was getting onto a flight that's going to take her to Delaware, where she's going to be meeting with campaign staff like the rest of us. Many of them caught on the very last minute of being shocked by what happened. It's possible just a little more than 24 hours ago now. Talk about her role in these early hours with so many people getting behind her to really shore things up, with her campaign, to shore things up with the folks in Congress, and frankly, to move forward.
Yeah, she's obviously done a lot of the things that she needs to do in this first 24 hours. She spent 10 hours on the phone after yesterday's announcement, we're told, making phone calls to congressmen and senators and governors and other party figures. And that's paying off because, in fact, the road does seem clear to the nomination for her. No, but you can't beat somebody with nobody, and nobody seems to be running at this point. So she seems to basically have it locked up. Obviously, anything could still happen. But if they are not announcing by the end of today, it's hard to see how in this very truncated period anybody else could even mount a credible campaign, much less actually take her on. So she's already looking ahead to the fall, to taking on Donald Trump beyond the campaign, beyond the convention. She has to raise money, as she's already showing that she can do. She has to consolidate the party behind her, and she has to demonstrate that she can be a national leader in a new way. Because while a lot of Americans know her, people don't know the vice president the same way they know a president. She's going to have that chance now to reintroduce herself, make clear who she is and how she fits into this political moment and what she wants to make the priorities of her campaign.
What do you expect we should see in the next couple of days from her? I mean, there's a sense that this introduction has to, just show people that she's up to being the leader of the free world. We've been hearing from a lot of folks out in battleground states who clearly are not tremendously familiar with her, who have not been following the news day to day. How high is the level of challenge, and what do we expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, she's been playing the inside game for the last 24 hours. We haven't seen her in public except for a brief appearance on the South Lawn to congratulate NCAA sports champions, which is kind of an odd first appearance for a person, debuting as a presidential candidate. So presumably in the next few days, she'll start to make the public case, which she hasn't done yet. You're right to say that there is obviously some disconcerted Democrats in places like the Midwest where they worry about whether she can, she can sell to their constituents. They don't know. Obviously, there's a concern that, she hasn't proven to be a great campaigner in the past, and that her own campaign in 2020 didn't even make it to the first vote. But I think there's such an excitement about a fresh face, right? I think Americans, broadly speaking, were really sick of the choice. They didn't want to have a rerun of 2020. They didn't want to have Biden and Trump as the only possibility. That's the reason why you see people like RFK Jr. doing reasonably well as an independent. They wanted a fresh face, and she now can present that to them, take the generational argument, flip it on its head, and make it about Trump being age 78 and suffering from his own cognitive issues. And hopefully, from her point of view, energize younger voters, black voters, women, others who might not have been necessarily all that excited about Joe Biden, but were part of his coalition.